Welcome into episode 371 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Brew and Scott McLaughlin. It's our second recording of the day, an emergency episode, of course, because the Bruins fired head coach Jim Montgomery after an 8-9-3 start to the season. Oh, there's Jim.
Poor Jim.
Poor Jim. 8-9-3 start to the year. We'll call it 4 days.
I saved this in case I needed it again, and I think I can probably delete it from the graphics page now.
I think so.
I don't know if we're going to have... I was saving it in case, like, they bounced back, and then it was like, Smug Jim, here he is, just giving us a little smirk, but I think
now it's just kind of... Yeah, now it just looks sad. Like...
Yeah.
Well...
You just made me sad. Like, I usually don't even feel emotions, and
that's not true.
Sad.
I've seen you listen to Taylor Swift.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to rattle through his record as the Bruins head coach. Now I feel like I'm cutting onions over here. But yeah, so 8-9-3 to start the year. We'll call it for what it is, 8-12. As the Bruins head coach in the regular season, he had a record of 120, 41, and 23. Andrew Raycroft tweeted that out not too long ago. So it's clearly a what have you done for me lately league. And at the same time, in this situation, Jim Montgomery, a bit of a scapegoat. I'm not saying he didn't contribute to what was ailing the Bruins this year, but he's certainly far from the only reason. But Bridget and Scott, let's get to your initial reactions from the firing.
Well, first of all, we tried to go live, and I apologize if people tried to watch us live. We could not figure it out. Maybe next time. Maybe next time there's breaking news, but
so it was trying to tell us like we need premium Twitter accounts. I can tell you right now, if that's the case, we will never be going live.
No, I'm talking about
I'm not giving Elon Musk any of my money.
No way, but maybe YouTube. But initial reaction. Well, we talked in our first episode of the day about reasons why it probably was coming to the end, and that included just the same issues not getting resolved. And at that point, if you're a coach, even though you're not able to, to play, the players are underperforming for sure. If you don't have the answer, then maybe you got to go outside and find someone who does. And maybe this team, there's no answer for them, but you have to try, bring a new voice into the room. So Don Sweeney, Cam Neely make this statement. It's time. I think you guys, I think he wasn't the full issue, but I do feel like this could help. I feel like they needed a spark, and this could be it. Other than this, if this doesn't work, I don't really know what else they could do. So
yeah, I mean, I would say he's a very small part of the issue. I think the issue goes so much deeper than the head coach. And, the second piece of the news here is that Joe Sacco has been named interim head coach. Obviously has been an assistant here since 2014. Has been here under three different head coaches, Claude Julien, Bruce Cassidy, and Jim Montgomery. Had gotten promoted to associate coach this past offseason. So not a new voice, but someone who's now going to have more of a say, obviously much more of a say in terms of what's going on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, we'll see. Like, obviously, my first reaction was this is a move that Don Sweeney had to make, whether it was now or sometime very soon if this continued. I thought it was going to be even earlier than this, to be completely honest. I think we've talked about that. Like, for a couple of weeks, I felt like I was at a point where it was, is it going to be tonight? Is it going to be tomorrow morning? Like, they've had enough of these backslides after like these small ups during the season where they've then gone, straight down the hill to the bottom of the valley again. And obviously the latest one is this 3-game losing streak that included a 5-1 blowout loss to Columbus Monday night. And you can only have so many of those before the general manager, Don Sweeney, has to do something to shake it up. And we talked about other possibilities like, a trade or how big of a trade would it need to be, or calling someone up or sending someone down, whatever.
I'm still mad at you for the Taylor Hall thing earlier.
Those are all relatively small things, and they're hard to do. Like, the easiest thing to do was always firing the head coach, and that's ultimately what Don Sweeney decided to do.
Bridget, do you want to clarify what you were saying just then?
I think Scott couldn't hear me, but I said I'm still mad at him for poo-pooing the Taylor Hall thing earlier. Like, I've been thinking about it all day. He brought it up last night, or not last night, whenever it was.
Well,
after
hold
the
on.
Bruins, the Bruins game, or no, before the Bruins game against Columbus, and then he was like, gave it 30 seconds earlier, and he was like,
No, yeah, fine, bring Taylor Hall back. I'm not dismissing that idea. I'm just saying that's not the shakeup this team needed. Like, it needs something more than that.
Well, I think it still needs more. I don't think the goalie change. I don't think the coaching change is going to be the only thing that gets them to perform better, because I think it's going to take multiple steps, and a trade would be another layer.
So there's definitely some more shoes to drop, and a lot of it depends on how the ensuing weeks, months play out, right? But my initial reaction is disappointment on behalf of Jim Montgomery. And I just want to say, like, I definitely think that the coaching staff is to blame partly for everything that's gone on. No doubt about it. I've been on record talking about my opinion on their training camp. I didn't like their training camp, being there in person to watch it. And lo and behold, the Bruins admit that themselves in the last week or so. And I have not loved their practices. I think their drills are elementary. Their intensity is very low. Now, the intensity part I put in the players, and the drills I put in the coaches. And then Bridget mentioned online and on a recent episode, like Charlie Coyle talked about, the practices have not been great. So the coaching is definitely they're to wear some of this, and this is what you're seeing. Jim Montgomery is relieved of his duties, but at the same time, I'm disappointed for Jim Montgomery, because this whole situation to me reeks of entitlement from players. I know we talk about the Bruins and the NHL and hockey for the sport that it is, and the professional business that it is, and it is just a business, but it does suck because Jim Montgomery is a good guy and a good coach, and he lost his job today. And I can't help but look at the players and how uninspired they've been, and ask myself, why, as a professional athlete, are you skating with your head up your ass? And Jim Montgomery was brought into Boston because he was supposed to be the opposite of what wore thin on the players under Bruce Cassidy. Bruce Cassidy was a hard-nosed, in-your-face, behind the scenes, into the media, old school guy that players probably said he wore as welcome. Okay, so let's bring in Jim Montgomery, who is the ultimate players coach, and then in his third season, you hit the ground with some tough times, and he has to play bad cop for a little bit, and now the team tunes him out, and now he's lost a job. Well, what's the common denominator here? It's a roster that's led by some of the same leaders. And by the way, Bruce Cassidy, Jim Montgomery, fired 2.5 years apart from each other, calendar years. That's not a long time. That's an indictment on the players, in my opinion. We can talk about roster construction and shortcomings from Don Sweeney. I'm here for that. We can talk about coaching down, shortcomings. I'm here for that. But the players, they should feel some type of way that a man lost his job today because of their lack of intensity and give a shit meter, in my opinion, over the first month and a half of the season.
Yeah, well, we heard after Monday night's game, Brad Marchand and Charlie Coyle both talking about guys needing to look themselves in the mirror and, accountability and things like that. Well, better be an extra long look in the mirror when you just cost a good man his job. And I think the players, by and large, still liked Jim Montgomery as a coach and as a person, as a man. I don't think, I think there were some players who, by the end, didn't like Bruce Cassidy, didn't like his approach, his messaging, the way he would criticize players in the media. I think there were still a lot of players who did like Bruce Cassidy and had all the respect in the world for him until the very end. I think most of that room still liked Jim Montgomery. Maybe, again, for whatever reason, obviously they weren't responding, and they weren't doing what he was trying to get them to do. But I'm sure, and I would hope that there's a lot of guys on that team right now as we sit here Tuesday night and who then show up at the rink Wednesday morning, um, with a sense of guilt. Like they should be feeling that because yeah, Montgomery definitely did have some shortcomings. Like I'm not absolving him of blame for how this season has gone. Um, there are a lot of things that he needed to do differently and better. But ultimately, it's on the play. Like when you hear things about, our practices haven't been good enough, and effort hasn't been there every day, or what, like all that stuff that's led to inconsistency. It's like that's on the players. Like no coach can make you work hard every day, or or lead you to somehow take days off. Like that's up to you. Like your effort every day is entirely up to you.
Yeah, I also think at practice, like it's on the players a lot, and leadership is a big part of motivation in practice. But also, coaches can motivate like coaches can punish uh, players or the whole team if they're not performing up to par in practice. So, like, I mean, we've all been part of teams where we got ran or skated, or uh, there was a little bit more strictness. But like you mentioned before, like that just kind of wasn't his style. And did it need to be maybe a little bit more? I don't know. But I've had coaches that definitely held the team accountable, and when we were practicing, like we're not at 100% speed.
So, Bridget, earlier on, sorry, Scott, go ahead.
I mean, I think Montgomery did that. Now, whether he picked the right times or did it enough, like it's not like he was just this. And I know you guys aren't doing this, but like it's not like he was just like this teddy bear who like always just gave out hugs and cookies. Like
Right.
he yelled at Brad Marchand and shoved him on the bench. He benched David Pasternak. He took
Right.
Charlie McAvoy off the top power play unit. He bag skated this team last year. Like it's not like it was an everyday thing, but it's also not like he couldn't coach hard or wouldn't.
So, Scott, it's funny you bring that up because that's exactly where I was going to go with this and ask you guys a question. Now, Bridget, earlier you talked about how you think this could be the spark the Bruins need, a different voice going outside. Obviously, Sacco is an interim hire. I want to reserve the Sacco effect in the response for a little bit later on. But Scott, what you just talked about. So the Bruins, is it a coincidence? And I know I'm not trying to make this a black and white question, but you just mentioned three things. You mentioned Montgomery, publicly yelling at and shoving Brad Marchand on the bench in the Utah game. Okay. Then he benches David Pasternak. Okay. Both forms of coaching I approve of, by the way. I'm glad he did both of those things. Takes McAvoy off the power play. Okay. Is it a coincidence that the team has been lifeless in the wake of... Now, they had a good game against Philly and Seattle. I'll give them that. And that was afterwards. But, well, the Pasternak benching was during Seattle, actually. But my point is, those are three moments, the first two in particular, the Marchand and the Pasternak things, where he is putting his top players on notice. And all I'm saying is that the grand scheme response, the big picture response in the month that followed those events was the most uninspired Boston Bruins team I've seen, most nights led by uninspired play from them. Even though behind the scenes and in the locker room, they'll tell you and Bridget and all the other reporters with the recordings on their phones the right things. But on the ice, since those actions that Jim Montgomery, in my opinion, rightfully took, the team has been terrible, and then he loses his job. Is that a coincidence? I don't mean to make it black and white, but to me, when we talk about the Bruce Cassidy stuff and the Montgomery stuff, it seems to me that once this locker room led by these leaders, and I'm going to talk about the leaders because the locker room has vastly changed in 2.5 years outside of these guys. It seems to me when a Bruins locker room with these guys at the helm kind of decide they're not feeling it with the guy, decisions happen because, well, I'll let you guys go because I have something else, but I'll let you guys go.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, I don't think it's a coincidence but I don't necessarily think the cause and effect is that Montgomery did those things, so those players turned on him or mailed it in or whatever. Like, I think where they're connected to me is more that there was already an issue with those guys not leading the way you need your leaders to lead. And I specifically mean bringing the highest effort day in, day out, game to game, practice to practice, period to period. And I think Montgomery did those things to almost as a message of like, hey, like if you guys aren't going to step up and take control of this yourselves, I'm going to step in and force you to. And I think it didn't work. Like it didn't create a problem. It just didn't fix a problem that already existed.
So, and I think what you were getting to, Brian, is that that's on the players.
Yeah, right? I mean, Monty was feeling the heat early in the season. You know, Monty went from a good cop to a bad cop at times earlier this year because he's coaching for his job, and so he did go outside of his comfort zone to reprimand his captain on the bench, knowing that there's cameras on him. He did go outside his comfort zone to, you know, scratch or bench rather for a full third period and call out, you know, his best player in David Pastrnak. He did go out on a limb to take Charlie McAvoy at the top power play unit. Now, we all said he should have done that anyway. But again, Charlie McAvoy is the number one D-man, and he's making $9+ million. Like, that's not an easy thing to do in that room. And he did those things out of desperation. And the response was pretty much, you know, directly or indirectly through their play, fuck you, Monty. Like, we're not going to give it our all for you. I don't know.
By the way,
yeah.
So I interrupt. I don't know if you guys saw it. I hadn't. So as we said at the top, this is our second recording of the day. I hadn't seen this when we recorded this morning, first thing this morning. But there was like another heated exchange between Montgomery and Marchand last night during the game. Not nearly to the extent as Utah, but you can clearly see like Monty with pointed criticism towards Marchand. And it's hard to tell if Marchand does it intentionally or if it's more just kind of like a reaction, but it almost looks like he like grabs or points at the C on his sweater. And like it's just hard to know if it was like intentional, like pointing like, hey, I'm the captain type of thing, or if it was like he was just like reaching to that area of his uniform anyways type of thing. But like there was definitely pointed criticism from Montgomery is how I would word it.
I've seen that video. I've also seen Marchand do that a million times before in his career without that C there. So you know, to me, that was a harmless, you know, second nature tick in my opinion. And you know, it also kind of looked like Marchand was like mouthing at the same time, like he understood what Monty was saying, and they were kind of like, but to your point, Scott, yes, I mean they're having some hard conversations on the bench, and so this leads me to the question I was going to ask, and I want to get you guys' opinion. Earlier in the year during training camp, please refresh my memory. Was Sweeney asked about this, or did he say this unprompted when he mentioned that they were working on a negotiation to extend Jim Montgomery? I forget how that played out, but at the end of the day, he mentioned in a press conference that the team was working on an extension with Jim Montgomery. My question is, why did he say that publicly if, like, clearly Monty's future in Boston was kind of dependent on a start? And I'm wondering if after and this is pure speculation. This is not for, clickbait. Like, this is just me if I was at a bar talking to you guys about hockey or somebody else that's listening. Like, I'm wondering if Sweeney said those comments publicly and then got a gauge from the room. Like, hold up there. We're not really too sold on Monty still. And then it became like what we've seen the last month and a half, which is he's kind of been coaching for his job. Why would he say that publicly if his job was this vulnerable from the start?
So my recollection, and I would like to fully revisit the timeline, but I think the first time Sweeney spoke at the start of camp, I asked him if there had been any conversations with Jim Montgomery about an extension. And he said that they had conversations. And that was pretty much it. He didn't say, we want to sign him to an extension or we're working towards an extension. He said, we've had conversations, and kind of left it at that. Then I think on media day at the Garden, someone else asked him about it, and I'm trying to remember exactly, but I think almost asked it in a little bit of a leading way where it was like, why was it important for you to let Jim Montgomery know you want to keep him? Like, it was worded in kind of like, it sort of twisted what he had initially said. And then Sweeney answered as if he did want to keep him. So he wasn't going to be like, well, actually what I said was, he went along with it and answered here's why it was important for me to express that to Monty, type of thing.
I remember it pretty similarly. It was a question that was asked Brian. It wasn't like he didn't just bring it up out of nowhere. And it was at the same time we were talking about all sorts of different contract extensions. It was during the heat of the Jeremy Swayman contract negotiation talk, and I believe Trent Frederick was brought up during the press conference about his contract coming up at the end of the year. So it was kind of just like everybody asking about each contract that was coming up.
But usually, and I do want to revisit this after we record, because I remember the three of us were talking about it. It was a talking point on the podcast about what seemed to be an inevitable extension, an imminent extension for Monty, and Sweeney's asked about contracts all the time, and he'll usually say, that's we keep those things, whatever. I just feel like there was a lot of optimism that from Sweeney, at least, that they intended on extending Jim Montgomery. And
based on what was done to that point, it doesn't sound crazy.
I know, but again, their numbers.
I'll be honest. I never took it that way. I never thought it was imminent. Because I even remember I went on with Andy Hart and Christian Arcand, and we were talking about that, and I said saying you've talked to him and even if you might like to get something done is very different than actually getting it done. It wasn't Jim Montgomery that was holding up negotiations. I don't think it's the Bruins. If they wanted to get it across the finish line at any point, I think they pretty easily could have. So I always approached it as that they can say whatever they want. They can say there's mutual interest and they're talking and whatever, but until they actually get it done, it's kind of meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'll go back and either way, I just feel like I just wonder if something was said, if Don Sweeney got a sentiment from players after training camp or whatnot, because again, the team's numbers right now suck. But it's not like they're what's their record right now? 8-9-3. It's not like they're 2-14 or whatever. It's like they're still, I don't know, to have the record he's had as their coach. I get it. It's been a bad start. And obviously I understand the firing. I'm just saying I don't know, that they're quick to pull the trigger there. Pretty quick after some optimism in the offseason.
I'd say I actually honestly thought they gave him a longer leash than I would have thought. I think we've talked about, there were 2 or 3 times where I was I think tonight might be the night or today might be the day. Yep. And I actually think like Sweeney and Neely wanted to be patient on this. And maybe if they could have found a trade, maybe that would have been the first step. But, you know, again, at a certain point, like if the coaches tried throwing everything at the wall, whether it's calling guys out, changing up lines, different approaches to practice, like whatever it might be, and none of it's working, then the general manager is the next guy who has to do something. And um, I feel like this just got to a point where it was. I think I said it this morning. Like it was hanging over this team, where they can say that they're ignoring the outside noise, and Marchand can say, I don't really know what everyone's talking about. But of course they do. Like they're human and they live in the same world as the rest of us. They don't live in a bubble. So of course they've heard some of it or seen some of it somewhere.
Well,
Yeah.
Sorry, to go back to what you said, Brian, about like, oh, did management get a vibe that the players weren't feeling it? I think more than likely what happened was they went into the season thinking if the first 2 months go well, then we'll sign it, and if they don't, then we're not. Like, it could be as simple as that. It probably is as simple as that. Like, if they get off to a hot start, done deal, get it done. Obviously, that's not what happened, and they kept feeling it out, and never started to go right. And so I think that they weren't left with a choice. Like, once October ends the way that it did, and they weren't playing well, that didn't make them want to sign Monty. So if results go differently, maybe he gets an extension, in the first 2 months of the season. That's not what happened. They never were able to right the ship while Monty was here. So will they be able to do it after? That's up to them in a lot of ways. So I just wanted to say that because I think that it would have happened. It could have happened if things went well the first 2 months of the season. We don't live in the universe where it did. And I also wanted to say, thinking back to when Bruce Cassidy got fired and we did our emergency podcast that time, none of us were expecting that one. We all saw this one coming. Like, that was a surprise. Like, and we were really saying like 100%, like this seems like a scapegoat issue, like which players were mad. I feel like it's a completely different circumstance this time. I think the players they still liked him from what I could tell. He still had good relationships with them. But the writing was on the wall and the results were what drove it. I mean, when Cassidy got fired, the Bruins had been a playoff team for years in a row, and it kind of came as a shock. But the patterns that the Bruins have had since Montgomery came, that have resulted in losing to the Panthers 2 years in a row and then not getting things together in the first 2 months of this season, I guess, really their hand was forced this time, whereas last time it seemed like more of a decision that they took a risk on, where this one it's kind of like they had to.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and I just went back and looked at Connor Ryan. I think it was Connor Ryan's article on Boston.com back in September. And Sweeney's comments were about how he and Monty had, they had began discussions on a new deal. And perhaps I'm hearing that and I'm misinterpreting that. Maybe I'm reading too much into that. Scott, to your point, it could just be, press conference type, jargon and nothing matters until it's, in black ink. So I guess I heard that and I just thought to myself, okay, well, if you were talking about a new deal, obviously at one point that kind of probably just stopped because they must have stopped doing that at some point here because it went from talking about a new deal, from what Sweeney said, whether it was legit or not, to hot seat from pretty much what felt like opening night. So Bridget, you talk about how you don't think the players, it wasn't the players not liking him. And I'm not here to disagree with that. I guess my question is, so why were they not working hard for the guy? Right? Especially when his job's on the line.
Yeah, that's what the looking in the mirror part's about, because they're not playing for themselves. Like, at the end of the day, it's their cup. If they win it, it's like it's their own accomplishments, and maybe they're just, I don't know, like you're doing it for yourself too. You're not doing it just for your coach. Like, I think a majority of the things that we do in life, we do because we want the results, right? Like when I'm working hard, when you guys are working hard, it's because I want the accomplishment at the end of the day, or I want the new job, or I want whatever it is. And like we want to make our bosses happy, but it's about us. And maybe the players, for whatever reason, they're hurting themselves as well. Like in all of this, they're hurting their chances of winning. But I don't know. Psychologically, I don't have a degree in that, so
yeah, I think there's this whole perfect storm of things that I think have led to some of this, where it's like, and one of these, like we heard Montgomery reference a couple times, and you could tell, even as he was saying it, you're like, I don't think he actually believes this. Where he's like, well, we've started hot the last 2 years, and it didn't really get us anywhere. So maybe we go through adversity early, and we'll be better prepared for the playoffs. And it's like, you don't believe that. Like, there's gonna be
that could happen. Just he's not here anymore to see the ending result of it.
It's like there's gonna be adversity at some point during the season anyway. So like, you don't have to pretend you wanted to run into it right out of the gate. Like, no one wants that. No one wants to get off to a bad start.
The first month of the season, we heard multiple players say that as well.
Yeah, so that kind of leads me into
probably McAvoy. I remember saying that.
Yeah, so like this perfect storm of like, I think that attitude did like creep in a little, where it was like, well, we've gone like balls to the wall out of the gates the last 2 years, and it didn't really do anything. So like, yeah, if we just kind of ease our way into the season, yeah, that's all right. And it's like, what you don't realize though is that as soon as you take your foot off the gas in any way in the NHL or any professional sport, like you're going to get humbled real fast, because other teams aren't doing that. Like 31 other teams aren't saying like, yeah, we're just going to kind of ease into the season and see what happens. Like, no, everyone wants to get off to a good start. So if that was like actually leaking into that room, and it seems like maybe it did, like there's one thing that's gone wrong. We've talked about the injuries and guys, important players being behind the 8 ball to start, whether it was Pasternak dealing with an injury that kept him off the ice part of the summer, Marchand's 3 surgeries and missing the start of camp, Elias Lindholm missing a week and a half coming to a new team. And then of course it's the whole Jeremy Swayman thing that we haven't ignored, but feels like now with some of the stuff in recent days is like even probably a bigger deal than we thought. Where you have like the Elliot Friedman stuff about how there's lingering hard feelings, and I mentioned it last on our first episode Tuesday, like that Swayman comment after the game about how he said like he thinks that he's had enough time to get himself back to where he should be, but he said the thing I really missed was this room, was being part of this room. And it's like it just gave me the impression that when he finally got in there right before the start of the season, that it wasn't just like everyone welcoming back with like open arms and hugs and everything's the same as it was before. Like it seems like he feels like he actually lost something or like missed out on something important there. And I can't help but think that that's been to some extent a factor in his play and in the team's play in front of him.
And psychologically, when you have someone that is, if you have a 1A, 1B goalie situation like the Bruins have the last 2 years, you are putting more effort automatically into certain things in practices and in games. Like it's another psychological thing. You can try to replicate it in your own mind, but the fact that Linus Ullmark was here pushed him harder than maybe he's pushed this season. And I'm not trying to say like he's not working hard, because I'm sure behind the scenes he is. But first of all, the relationship with Ullmark, he valued a lot. And second of all, the competition was higher for the net. And that kind of thing does drive people, whether or not you subconsciously or consciously notice it. So that's another layer to this too.
Well, he's successfully played himself down into a competition with Jonas Korpisalo. So he does have that.
So So just a couple comments to catch us up to speed here. So as far as the commentary from the leaders about and Jim Montgomery at times this year is saying how we started off so well the last couple of years. We kind of, we went all out early on, and where did it get us? Let's just dissect those two starts, by the way, because it's rich that Charlie McAvoy is the one talking about it, because Charlie McAvoy wasn't even on the ice in 2022, 2023 when the team got off to a good start. Oh yeah, neither was Brad Marchand. They both missed like the first month and a half of the season or whatever. Now they came back earlier than expected, but as far as that initial start to the year, they weren't a part of that. Okay, and then last year, the team relied on the goalie tandem to bail them out and all these giving up all these high danger chances. And go back and look at their schedule from the first 10 games of the year last year. You had a couple games against Chicago. You had Anaheim a couple of times. You had San Jose. So they had a very favorable schedule to get off to a good start last year. So this whole we just came out and blitzed everybody. Like, okay, in 22-23, yeah, Charlie, your teammates did. You joined them around Thanksgiving. But
not for nothing, but that team was very consistently good the whole year.
22-23?
The first season that Montgomery when he won.
Yeah, of course. And I'm not trying to take away anything from that team's regular season. I'm just saying Charlie McAvoy, the one saying it, he wasn't there, right? So, but regardless, now, and again, you have to know, Bridget Scott, they knew going into that Columbus game in particular, right, that anything shy of a convincing win, or at least 2 points at the bare minimum, was possibly going to get their coach fired. Very likely going to get their coach fired. Scott, could you imagine if your direct, superior, who you have a great relationship with, their job was contingent on you having a strong article, and you just don't even have a shit article? You actually, you barely write a couple of words.
You get drunk and then you write something.
Knowing their job's on the line. Or Bridget, it would be like you with your broadcasting.
Yeah, I show up without doing any research and just come and don't even know who. Yeah.
Imagine not even putting in the effort when you know that their job's on the line. What does that tell you? What's that say about your respect for that for their job? And that's, to me, is where I can't believe that David Pastrnak plays the Columbus Blue Jackets, the last place team in the Eastern Conference, Ridge and Scott. They had given up 36 goals in November, and he gets 0 shots on goal. And by the way, outside of the shots on goal, was invisible. That's the type of stuff where it's it's pretty basic. It's very simple. Move your legs if you have respect for the guy in his job. And I'm picking on Pastrnak. It kind of goes up and down the lineup. It's I don't know. It's strange. It's strange, and we are where we are now. But
what's crazy to me is that first period, the Bruins did outchance high danger chances. I think it was 5-2 over Columbus, and the Bruins were losing 3-0 after that period. But it still felt like it was within reach until all of a sudden we're getting to Columbus adding the 4th and 5th goal. But wait, Scott, 1 second. But if the Bruins, even if they did give up those 3 goals in the first, it felt like they were so close after the Coyle goal to turning things around, making it a comeback. If that's a win, however they get it, I don't think we're having this second podcast today.
Well, but even that first period though, obviously goals aside, the most discouraging thing to me at the end of the first period was the Bruins had outshot Columbus in the first period, and yet the Bruins' top 2 lines at 5-on-5 had gotten outshot 7-2. So it was all right, some of your depth kind of showed up, but you're even in that first period, your top 2 lines were an absolute no-show. And they really never showed up at any point.
Well, I looked at Natural Stat Trick after the first period, as I'm sure Scott did as well. And one that stood out was Swayman was below goal save above expected. Columbus would have scored, it said 0.5 goals were the expected goals in the first period, and he gave up 3. And the Bruins had 1.5 goals expected in the first period, and they scored nothing. So, I mean, that's a stat that tells you Swayman missed some that he should have had. And it's one of those things when we were talking about the playoffs and in his first season, like what went wrong. It's like there was a lot. There's a lot of different things that you can point to that went wrong in the Columbus game and leading up to it in the first 2 months of the season.
Well, yeah, and it's like, just thinking about it, it's like Van Riemsdyk's goal was lucky. Like that's just thrown to the front and banks off. I'm like, that's not a high danger chance because it's a low percentage play. But like, I also can't get on Swayman for that one. Now, the shorthanded goal against, like, I'm sorry, you have to make that stop. Like, he just looked like he wasn't.
There were two.
Honestly, but like both of them, he should have done better on. The first one, he absolutely should have saved. Period. Like that wasn't. I said it like it just looked like he had his stick in the wrong position, and like almost helped it in. The second one, maybe he doesn't save it anyways, but I mean, talk about overcommitting. Like, guys, he was like 10 feet to the right of the near post. Like the entire net was empty.
I think the one word I would use to describe the Bruins lately, and for most of this year, has just been careless. They've been careless with their effort. They've been careless with their decision making, and I hope they're happy because their coach is fired. So Monty hopefully is back in the saddle pretty soon with another coaching opportunity soon. I'm sure he will be, but Scott,
you see like. If you see like where the news gets tweeted out, different national accounts or NHL or whatever, like you can already see like other teams' fan bases just lining up, like hoping their team brings them in. Like I know like we talked to Tom, I'm pretty sure he said this on the pod, but he was like, yeah, I had like multiple people in St. Louis that like asking me like, do you think he's gonna get fired? Because St. Louis would love to have him. And yeah, so I don't think he's gonna, maybe it's not right away, but I imagine he'll be at the top of some list whenever the next openings come.
What happened to how did it go for the last Bruins coach to get fired?
He won a Stanley Cup right after, first
season. The next year. the guy who wasn't the right coach for the job for the Bruins, for these Bruins players. All right. Well, hopefully Monty finds himself with Florida or something like that. Or some contender this year because he's a good guy, good coach.
He's gonna end up with Florida, but
no. Sorry, not necessarily. Maybe he's an assistant for a little bit. Who knows? I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
But
well, I think that brings us to something here too that we haven't talked about yet, which is, do the Bruins bring in someone? Like obviously, interim is interim. How long that is undefined. So Joe Sacco comes in. And I'm seeing tweets all over the place like, oh, this person's available, that person's available. I haven't seen one yet that I'm thinking, oh, that guy makes sense. Hire that guy right now. And I'm sure there's plenty of people that are off everyone's radar right now because you think that they're really happy where they are and maybe they're wanting to make a jump. I mentioned Jay Pandolfo's name at BU earlier. I think he's happy there, but who knows? Maybe they reach out, say, hey, let's have a conversation and something sparks with him, or that's just, a name that I know that
BU's off to a slow start. Maybe we can just do the old switcheroo, maybe, hey, Jim Montgomery wore BU gear last year. Let's remember.
I don't know what keeps bringing me back to Jay Pandolfo in this situation. They have to talk to him, right? I mean, I know
so can I read you? Bruins. Yeah, can I read Pierre LeBrun's reporting on this?
Yes.
So Pierre LeBrun, obviously, National Insider Athletic, TSN, tweeted, Joe Sacco has the interim tag, but the Bruins will give him a real look before reaching out to any other candidates. My understanding is there won't be a coaching search for now. Sacco is well-liked and well-respected within the organization and gets a real crack at it first.
But does he not get any of the criticism that falls to Jim Montgomery? Because I feel like they were all part of this slow start.
Yes, but that report does not surprise me in the least. The Bruins, it's probably an NHL thing too, an NHL pattern, but certainly with the Bruins, they're not going to go outside the organization mid-season because it probably takes too much time and energy for somebody with completely new eyes and completely new potential systems to implement.
Maybe they need that.
No. I know. I'm not disagreeing, but what I'm saying is, like, the Bruins probably are going to choose the path, of least resistance and just go with the internal hire, just like they did with Bruce Cassidy. They gave Bruce Cassidy the season to see how he does. They're going to do the same thing mid-season with Joe Sacco. Now, if it's a train wreck, then you bet your ass is that he's not going to be the coach next season. But they'll probably, at the very least, regardless of what happens, either the Bruins somehow respond and get back on track, in which case the Bruins are going to keep him around because, he did a great job with that, or they're not going to respond to him. The Bruins will probably let the team, end where it's going to end. It's probably going to end in some other job casualties, and they'll, ownership or whomever will, start the Sweeney would be gone. If Sacco fails and the Bruins miss the playoffs, Sweeney's gone. Sacco's gone.
Are we sure?
No. But I would have to imagine that is what they would do. I mean, we all know the Jacobs perk their ears up when they miss the playoffs.
Definitely, but we also know Charlie Jacobs, to this point, has loved Don Sweeney and has really had his back. Sweeney and Cam Neely, the two of them, like, Charlie Jacobs has gotten, almost defensive when people have questioned the job that they've done at all, or whether they're the right guys. So yes, missing the playoffs gets their ears up because that is very important for them. I do wonder if it's one missed season, if that's enough, or would it have to be a second? Would Sweeney get an opportunity to fix it, to retool? Like, do you let him sell pieces at the deadline to try to get back prospects, picks, look to the future a little? Or is it, hey, your mandate this season was to make the playoffs and have a contender, and if you come up short, you're done?
My issue, sorry, bro, I just want to get this out of my brain before I forget. My issue is that if the Bruins keep Sweeney, and if the Sacco experiment doesn't kickstart anything, because, by the way, that's a different conversation. I mean, it might jolt them for a couple practices, and let's see what happens. But let's just say that this team, they don't have it this year, and let's say they continue to struggle despite the coaching change. In my opinion, and I don't mean to jump ahead, months here, but hypothetically speaking, okay, if the Bruins are out of the playoffs, right, or it's just very clear that they're just not, going to go very far. Maybe they find a way to sneak into the playoffs if they go on a run, whatever. And you're approaching a trade deadline. I think you have to have somebody with the balls to potentially trade a pending UFA that would have a lot of value for a contender. And I think somebody who comes to mind would be a Brad Marchand. Does Don Sweeney have the guts, if need be, to make that change if that's what's best for the Boston Bruins long term? I think you have to ask the question, because if the Bruins continue to struggle, you have to try to replenish some picks. I think you can get something for Brad Marchand. Now, it's weird to say this because, first of all, I love Marchand as a player, and the Bruins could turn things around, and this comment that I'm saying will, maybe be moot. But if they don't turn it around, you have to have a GM who's willing to make an unpopular decision in that room. And I just don't know if Sweeney would do something like that. And if he doesn't do something like that this year, then why would he be the guy going forward? A GM's not going to want to tear down what he had a big part in building. You're going to need some fresh eyes. And if the Bruins ownership doesn't make that decision, then shame on all of them. Honestly, like, that's what's going to happen, in my opinion, if they struggle this year.
Two things, because I had a thought before, but just to respond to the Marchand thing, I almost brought this up earlier when you guys said, when we were talking about every single person asking at the preseason press conference with management, like, about each player that came, has a contract that's up. Marchand and Frederick are two. But remember when we were hearing reports that it was done, and obviously it's not done. Was this a similar situation to Sweeney where it was going to be results based, and then all of a sudden you're like, I don't know. But I just wanted to say that because I almost mentioned it earlier and I didn't, and it kind of came back into my mind. But what I was going to say to what Scott mentioned first was, I think the deadline, like making the playoffs isn't the only thing that's going to decide whether or not Sweeney's here or not. Like it's going to be the moves in between, and it's going to be also whether or not Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov turn things around, like make him look better in that fashion. Swayman make him look better, like the contract wasn't an overpay. Like there's certain performances that could happen this season that justify moves that he's made recently, but also what he decides to do with the deadline and what every coach every manager does to, around the deadline to either sell or buy and change the team. Obviously, like remember Chaim Bloom. Chaim Bloom didn't make a lot of moves at the trade deadline for the Red Sox. He gets fired. Whether or not management or his bosses were fine with that, with the moves he made and told him it was fine at the time, is a different story. But your deadline moves determine the trajectory of the team, but also your career, and you kind of got to do what everybody wants you to do. And if it's blow it up because they're in a bad situation, then he's got to do that. But I'm not ready to say that's where they are yet, because who knows? This could spark something, like we mentioned off the top. Like I saw Paul Bissonnette tweet out, like, don't give up on the Bruins yet. Like there is reason to believe they could.
He was trolling because he also tweeted.
Was he really? Okay, I didn't read I don't know if I read the context correctly, but
no. He tweeted both.
So that a second tweet, Bridget.
Yeah, so that people would react to both.
One of his tweets was that the Bruins are dead.
And then he tweeted right, oh, that's smart. Yeah. That's really good. Have you ever tried that, Scott?
I think I might start to. Yeah.
You see which one gets the most likes, and then you delete the other
one. Bridget, the thing you just said recently, like that's it. Like it's a wait and see, right? Like this could spark, and let's see. I mean, I think the three of us here, I don't know, it's gonna have to be a pretty dramatic turnaround. I'm very curious to see the tempo and pace of practice tomorrow, and if that continues through beyond just when all eyes are on them and a new coach. I bring up the Marchand thing simply, because I know it's a premature conversation, but I just like to look at both sides of things. Like if things turn around, that's then great. But if things don't turn around, like I think that there has to be a willingness to, like, would you guys consider that? I mean, I think, if it got to that point, there'd be a lot of contenders that would love him on a second, or depending on how deep the team is, third line that probably has a couple of picks or whatever. Like, I'm just saying, as a general manager, if your team doesn't perform and there's certain situations on your roster contractually, based on age, term, all these things, that you have to be willing to make some hard decisions that go against what your heart wants, but you have to go with your head. And I question if Don Sweeney, if push comes to shove, would trade Brad Marchand if it's for what's best for the Bruins. Maybe he would, but I
mean, if you're out of it, like it has to be on the table along with other pending UFAs or even RFAs, like anyone you don't think is part of your future. Yeah, like it would be reckless not to explore trading them and see what's out there. So we don't, like, obviously age-wise, Marchand only has a certain number of years left. He would probably like to tell you that it's going to be into his 40s and he's going to play forever. Realistically, I don't know if that's going to happen. He has dealt with a lot of injuries in recent seasons, and had a bunch of surgeries. So, like, time comes for everyone. So, yeah, if
you're morbid.
It does.
I'm not ready to accept that yet.
It's coming. It's coming for this podcast, which is why I quickly wanted to touch on. Just mention that. So Don Sweeney and Joe Sacco will both be meeting with the media on Wednesday at practice, but we did get statements from Sweeney and Cam Neely as part of the Bruins press release, and one part of Sweeney, obviously, they both praise Jim Montgomery as a good coach, good person, thank him and his family, wish him luck, all that. One part of Sweeney's, I think that is worth reading, though. It says, our team's inconsistency in performance in the first 20 games of the 2024-25 season has been concerning and below how the Bruins want to reward our fans. I believe Joe Sacco has the coaching experience to bring the players and the team back to focusing on the consistent effort the NHL requires to have success. We will continue to work to make the necessary adjustments to meet the standard and performance our supportive fans expect. The part that really stands out there to me is bring the players and the team back to focusing on the consistent effort the NHL requires. Just a very clear admission that effort has not been there this year.
Right. And is that because of Jim Montgomery, or is that because of the players? Like, Scott, you bring up a good point earlier. Like, and this morning when we recorded, you brought up something that I didn't even consider when talking about the Elliot Friedman comments about how there's still lingering issues or lingering, hard feelings with how the Swayman negotiations went. And I jumped to conclusions thinking it was hard feelings between management and the player and vice versa. I did not even consider it could be hard feelings between players. And so I think the Bruins had a lot of negative publicity around them before puck drop on opening night. Had nothing to do with the players in the room. It had to do with the player that was holding out of a contract. And I'm sure that the Bruins players didn't appreciate being dragged through the mud for one of their teammates' public, drama with the team. And so I guess I'm wondering, Scott and Bridget, like, if there is some hard feelings amongst teammates.
Like, I mean, are you talking about just Swayman or just
I don't
general of each other?
Swayman. I'm bringing up Swayman because of the comments from Elliot Friedman. So that's an example. Let's say hypothetically there's some players who, let's just say that there's some sort of friction in the room in general. I'm not even going to name names. Let's just say hypothetically. Let's say there's friction among teammates for one way or another, one reason or the other, or has been to start this year. And we heard Brad Marchand's comments in September about how he will never talk about his contract negotiations in the media right in the wake of the Swayman stuff. So it kind of seemed pointed at that point. But regardless, if there's friction among teammates possibly or was, what is that something Joe Sacco can fix that Jim Montgomery couldn't fix? Is Joe Sacco going to let them fight in practice and like Herb Brooks and Miracle? Like, I don't think so. So what does the coaching change do in that? If that's a potential issue in the room, what does the coaching change do there? That's what I'm curious to find out. And I'm not trying to say that there's friction in the room as fact, right? We're just speculating based on something Scott said this morning, and that was it was something I didn't think about. So again, we're just
not even speculating. It's just like talking about things that pop into your head throughout the day or whatever. But and I'm sure we're not the only ones who thought of it. But I guess to answer your question, the role would be to calm things down, not to say like, hey, once everybody starts pulling their weight, you guys aren't going to be feeling as stressed. So like it brings the tension, like to bring the tension away from, because it's very clear there's tension in the room. And I don't think it's at each other. I think it might be like in a self-reflective way that there's like a, hey, I don't want to be playing like this kind of situation where at least that's the sentiment. So yeah, the role would be to kind of calm everything down, I think.
Yeah, I think the very first task for Joe Sacco is like sit down, team meeting, and figure out like, okay, what do we have to do to get to a consistent effort every day with everyone on the same page, doing the same things? Because if they're disjointed at all off the ice, like we can all see with our own eyes, they've been very disjointed on the ice. Like they just are not connected at all. Whether it's forwards not getting back on defense or defensemen not being involved in the offense, or passes through the neutral zone just completely missing it, like all that stuff of like guys just not working together. So like the very first thing is getting everyone on the same page, because it all season long it hasn't looked like they've been on the same page. So whatever that looks like, whether it's does that start with a full team meeting? Does it start with meeting with the captains and going from there? Is it by position? Like however you have to go about it. And like what I would wonder about is, you would assume to some extent Joe Sacco has already been doing that. So I would just hope that he has some different ideas than what this staff is already doing. And maybe he does. Like maybe there's things that he wanted to do and that he sees opportunities for that Jim Montgomery didn't want to do or didn't think was the right approach. Like
Well,
you would hope there's something different coming, because obviously like they can't just keep doing the same thing.
Scotty, that sounds like the first question you're asking in tomorrow's press conference.
Mm-hmm.
What do you plan on doing differently? I'm sure it will be asked, if not by you, by someone else. I wish I could go. I have 2 coaches calls. I have one at 9 and one at 11. So I'm not going to be able to make it, but we'll be waiting for, to follow along. Scott sending us the audio and following along on Twitter with everyone else. And I don't know, is Nesson doing a live stream of this? Like, are they taking this live? I don't really know. I haven't seen it announced, but potentially
I have no idea.
Sometimes they do it for special occasions like this. So
I mean, Bridget, earlier you said you commented like, doesn't Sacco carry some of the blame in what's happened? And the answer to that is absolutely. I think to the question you suggest Scott asks tomorrow, as an assistant coach, there's an element of like you're never going to want to step on the toes of the head coach. And so like, I'm sure he's thinking things, or he wants to say things or do things, but the buck kind of stops with Monty. And I think out of respect for that position. So we'll see. Now that he has the reins, we'll find out starting tomorrow.
Yeah, when you're the bridesmaid, you can't tell what the bride wants to do. It never goes well.
You can't wear white. Can't wear white, Joe. Cannot do it. So we'll find out. We'll find out. All right. Any final comments, guys, before we go?
Nice to have a BU head coach.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
Scott.
well, I did tweet that out. Not that it was nice. I just tweeted out that he went to BU, and I was thinking of Scott in mind when I was doing that.
And by the way, Joe Sacco, it's his first head coaching stint in the NHL in about a decade plus. So this is not a experienced NHL head coach coming in and just grabbing everybody, be like, wake up. It's a new experience for him too, relatively.
Yeah, I mean it's a little similar to Bruce Cassidy in a way, where Bruce Cassidy had to wait a long time between his first NHL head coaching gig and his second, and by his own admission had a lot to learn during that time. Then things didn't go very well for Joe Sacco in Colorado. It was a young team rebuilding, but their rebuild kind of took steps back under him. And I've read articles where he's reflected on it, and I'm sure we'll get some of this tomorrow too. And he talked about how he had things to learn as a head coach that he didn't deal with younger players the way that he probably should have. And I remember talking to Kevin Shattenkirk last year, because he was a young player in Colorado on those teams, and now obviously many years later reunited with Sacco late in his career. And I one day, like, I just asked Shattenkirk, is he different? Like, what's it been like reuniting with him? And he's softened up. He's like in like a joking way. But it was like, that's what he needed to do. Like, he was too hard and was probably too rigid in his approach back then. And I think has learned, obviously we're going to see just how much he learned, but by all accounts, it sounds like he's learned a lot in the decade plus. Is he
gonna push Marchand on the bench? At some point in March or something, we'll see. And also, that's a good demonstration of how long ago it was that Kevin Shattenkirk was a young player at the time when he was coaching him in Colorado.
Well, I mean, so I mean, Sacco's seen it all. If there's any patterns or issues in the locker room or anything with coaching and the leadership, I mean, Sacco's been here now through the end of Claude, right? All of Cassidy, all of Montgomery. So he's been around to see the highs and lows with all the not the highs with Claude, but with Bruce and Jim, he was there for the highs and lows. Saw when it was at its best and saw it through to when they got fired. So, if anybody has a strong pulse on, what's going on in that room for the last decade, it's Joe Sacco, and definitely has a lot of, one would think, would have a lot of respect from the people in the room, but we'll see how it's implemented. Alrighty, unless there's a third emergency episode tonight where Brad Marchand gets traded, I think we're probably good for November 19th, guys. So, thank you all very much for listening, and we will talk to you as planned on Friday morning. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.